250 leaders, men known by name in every tribe, each one holding a bronze censer in his hand, fire lit, incense rising before the tabernacle. And one condition that defied all logic: not a single one of them had authorization to be there. This is the story of Korah, Dathan, Abiram, and the 250 princes who challenged Moses in the desert. Most people picture the episode as a political quarrel that ended in swift divine punishment. The truth recorded in Numbers 16 and 17 is far denser than that. What happened that day demanded an intervention unlike anything else in all of Scripture. The earth did not merely tremble. It split open with surgical precision, swallowed specific people, closed back over them, and returned to looking like solid ground. Then fire came down and consumed another 250 men where they stood, still holding their censers. And the people, rather than recoiling in fear, marched against Moses and Aaron the very next day. Follow what was actually at stake. Put the exact moment in perspective. Israel had been out of Egypt for roughly 14 months, according to the chronology most widely accepted by Pentateuch scholars. The people had already witnessed the 10 plagues, crossed the Red Sea on dry ground, received the manna in the desert for more than a year, stood before the thunder at Sinai, and watched Nadab and Abihu consumed by fire before the altar. They had just received the sentence of 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, following the episode of the 12 spies in Numbers 14. The adult generation had just discovered they would die in the desert without ever seeing the promised land. Morale was at rock bottom, resentment was boiling, and it was precisely at that point that Korah chose to act. Think about Korah's position within the camp. He was no outsider. He was a Levite from the family of Kohath, a direct cousin of Moses and Aaron. The Kohathites held a specific and exceptionally elevated function. They were responsible for transporting the most sacred objects of the tabernacle, including the Ark of the Covenant, the lampstands, the table of showbread, and the altar of incense, all of it carefully covered and wrapped by the priests, before being carried, but still borne on the shoulders of the Kohathites. It was an enormous privilege. By the standards of that era, it already placed them one step away from the priesthood itself. But Korah wanted the priesthood itself, and he did not want it alone. He built a movement, measure the political scale of what he assembled. He drew in Dathan and Abiram from the tribe of Reuben, along with On, son of Peleth. Reuben was the tribe of Jacob's firstborn. It had lost its spiritual primacy back in the patriarchal era, after Reuben's sin with Bilhah, but it had carried a wounded pride throughout the entire family history. They camped on the south side of the tabernacle, exactly the same side as the Kohathites, close enough to talk every day. The same patch of desert, day after day. And the resentment against Moses' leadership found a natural echo in Reuben. Add to that 250 princes of the congregation, men of renown, known by name in every tribe. That detail changes everything. These were not ordinary men. They were recognized leaders, heads of ancestral houses, men of real influence throughout the camp. This means Korah's uprising was not a small protest among the discontented. It was a cross-cutting coalition, carefully stitched together, drawing from Levitical religious elites, Reubenite tribal leadership, and prominent representatives from every other tribe. All of it moving against 2 elderly brothers who had come out of Egypt alongside them and walked through the desert, carrying the weight of an entire nation on their backs. Look at the argument they made. They came to Moses and Aaron and said, according to Numbers 16:3, you have gone too far. The whole congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord? Taken at face value, the argument almost sounded pious. They were citing the very promise God had made in Exodus 19:6, that Israel would be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. They were turning a doctrinal truth into a political lever. They took a real biblical principle and used it to hollow out the specific authority God had established over the Aaronic priesthood and Mosaic leadership. And there lay the dangerous subtlety. Korah did not deny God. He did not want to return to Egypt, as Dathan and Abiram would suggest at another point. He did not worship idols. He acknowledged the Lord. He simply wanted to reorganize who spoke in the Lord's name. He wanted to democratize what God had designated as a specific function. He wanted to burn incense himself. He wanted to enter the Holy of Holies. He wanted to occupy Aaron's role. Consider the irony. The Kohathites, to which Korah belonged, were already the Levites closest to the sacred objects. They already held a ministry no other family possessed. They were the second highest tier of access to the tabernacle. And yet, for Korah, it was not enough. Where extraordinary honor already existed, he read injustice. But there is another angle that must be examined. Dathan and Abiram brought a different argument than Korah's. When Moses called them to come and speak with him, they refused to appear. They sent back a poisonous message recorded in Numbers 16:13. Is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, that you must also make yourself a prince over us? Look at what they did. They called Egypt a land flowing with milk and honey. The phrase God used to describe Canaan, they applied to the Egypt of slavery. They had inverted the entire narrative. In their telling, Moses was the tyrant and Pharaoh had merely been the lord of a prosperous land. Resentment had erased their own memory. Measure the magnitude of that memory collapse. Roughly 14 months earlier, their backs had bled under the whips of Egyptian taskmasters. They had seen their babies threatened by Pharaoh's decree against Hebrew boys. As recorded in Exodus 1, they had eaten bread in the labor camps of Pithom and Rameses, and now, in the desert, with manna falling every morning, water springing from rock, cloud by day and fire by night, they were deciding that Egypt had been the land of milk and honey. Resentment against Moses' legitimate authority had rewritten 14 months of recent history, and that is one of the deepest veins this narrative opens. Resentment does not need facts. It builds its own. Now follow the test that Moses proposed. Knowing that the conflict was not human but spiritual, Moses offered a definitive proof. He told Korah and the 250 princes to return the next day, each one with his censer, with coals and incense, and to offer the fragrance before the Lord. Whoever the Lord chose would be the Holy One. Moses knew exactly what that meant. He knew what had happened to Nadab and Abihu, Aaron's 2 sons, in Leviticus 10, when they offered unauthorized fire. They were consumed on the spot. And now 250 men were preparing to repeat that very gesture. Moses gave them every opportunity to step back. They did not step back. Look at the night before the test. The entire camp must have spent hours in whispers. The families of the 250 princes settling children, wives and servants. The wives of the rebel leaders in tense conversations with their neighbors. Tents lit later than usual. The loyal Kohathites who had not joined Korah lying down, not knowing whether by morning they would be seen as traitors or as survivors. Ordinary Levites mentally rehearsing their routine duties. Priests from Aaron's house, in silence, rearranging their utensils. Aaron himself already old, approximately 83 or 84 years old, according to the most accepted chronology, listening to Moses explain what needed to be done. Silence. The sun rose over the wilderness of Paran. Consider the physical setting of that morning, likely near Kadesh Barnea, in an arid region of the northeastern Sinai Peninsula or the southern edge of Canaan. Depending on the geographic reconstruction, temperature climbing fast, pale sand reflecting the light. The tents of the 12 tribes arranged in military formation around the tabernacle, as specified in Numbers 2. At the center, the tabernacle covered by the cloud of glory, each tribe at its appointed compass point. And then the movement began. The 250 princes came forward, each one with his bronze censer in hand, coals glowing, aromatic incense already prepared, the honorable garments of their respective tribes. They walked to the entrance of the tabernacle and took their positions. Korah was there with them, everything according to the script Moses had proposed. But the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron something that completely altered the situation. He said, "Separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." The divine intent was to destroy the entire camp. Moses and Aaron fell face down on the ground and interceded. "O God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and will you be angry with all the congregation?" That intercession redirected the sentence toward the specific guilty parties. Without that prayer, Numbers 16 would have ended in collective slaughter. All of Israel would have died that morning. Moses stood up. He went to the tent of Dathan and Abiram. The elders of Israel went with him. He said to the people, "Depart, please, from the tents of these wicked men, and touch nothing of theirs, lest you be swept away with all their sins." The Israelites moved back. They retreated step by step. The families of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram stood at the entrances to their own tents. Wives, young children, household belongings, all in plain view. Here the text records a painful detail. In Numbers 16:27, it is written that Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the entrances of their tents with their wives, their sons, and their little ones. Consider what that means. They had brought their families outside with them, perhaps thinking they were presenting a united front against Moses, perhaps still believing nothing would happen. Later Jewish tradition debated for centuries the level of culpability belonging to those families. The text leaves the reader with a raw image. Small children standing beside their rebel fathers at the exact moment the ground was about to open. Witness what came next. Moses said to the people, "By this you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, and that it has not been of my own accord. If these men die, as all men die, or if they are visited by the fate of all mankind, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord creates something new, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into Sheol, then you shall know that these men have despised the Lord." And it happened, as soon as he had finished speaking all these words, the ground under them split apart. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up, with their households, and all the people who belonged to Korah, and all their goods. They and all who belonged to them went down alive into Sheol, and the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. All Israel who were around them fled at their cry, for they said, "Lest the earth swallow us up too." Think about the physical scene. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of people running in every direction in panic, entire families disappearing while their neighbors watched. The sound the text calls their cry, screams muffled by the earth closing over them, and then silence. Sand resettling, stones sinking back into place, no visible sign that just seconds before there had been inhabited tents standing there. The place looked like empty desert again, as though nothing had ever stood upon it. And it still was not over. Fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering incense. They were all near the entrance of the tabernacle, holding their censers, incense still rising. The fire came down with surgical precision. It touched only the men. The censers remained intact. Bronze does not burn easily at such temperatures, but the narrative tradition emphasizes that the instruments were preserved deliberately. Eleazar, son of Aaron, was sent to collect them. This is Numbers 16:38 through 39. The censers were hammered into plates and used as covering for the altar, a permanent memorial, a reminder for all generations. No outsider to the family of Aaron was to come near the altar to burn incense, under penalty of becoming like Korah and his congregation. And the hardest work had not even begun. The next day, the entire congregation of the children of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, saying, "You have killed the people of the Lord." Follow the magnitude of that moment. A supernatural event without precedent had just taken place. The earth had opened. Fire had come down. Leaders known by name in every tribe had been consumed, and the people, rather than falling in repentance, turned against the surviving brothers. They accused Moses and Aaron of murder. The rebellion had roots deeper than any single day of judgment could reach. The cloud covered the tabernacle. The glory of the Lord appeared. And God said again to Moses, "Get away from the midst of this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." For the second time in 48 hours, all of Israel stood a breath away from annihilation. But the plague had already begun. The text is clear. Death was spreading through the camp with the speed of an invisible fire. Moses commanded Aaron to do something that represents the most spectacular spiritual inversion in all of Torah. He said, "Take your censer and put fire on it from off the altar, and lay incense on it, and carry it quickly to the congregation, and make atonement for them. For wrath has gone out from the Lord. The plague has begun." Aaron ran, an old man, roughly 84 years old, the high priest, carrying a burning censer. He moved through the camp. He stood between the dead and the living, and the plague stopped. Consider the precision of that detail. Standing between the dead and the living. On one side, bodies falling. On the other, people still breathing, and Aaron in the middle, with the incense rising. The same gesture that had killed 250 men the day before was now saving thousands. The difference was not in the instrument. It was in who had been appointed to use it. That was exactly the point Korah had denied. Those who died from the plague numbered 14,700, apart from those who died in the affair of Korah. Adding it up, roughly 15,000 people in 2 days. In a population estimated by the various censuses of the Pentateuch at something like 650,000 men of military age, meaning possibly more than 2 million people total, counting women, children, and the elderly. The loss was great, but compared to what could have happened, it was a surgical cut to contain something far worse. But God wanted one definitive sign of who the chosen priest was. He commanded Moses to collect a staff from each of the 12 tribal leaders, each staff bearing the name of its prince, and one staff for Aaron, with his name, representing Levi. The 12 staffs were placed inside the tabernacle, before the Ark of the Testimony. They stayed there through the night. The following morning Moses entered and found a scene that borders on the impossible. Aaron's staff had budded. It had produced buds, bloomed with blossoms, and yielded ripe almonds overnight. Dead wood completing an entire botanical cycle in hours. The other 11 staffs were exactly as they had been left. Notice the brutal symbolism of that staff. It was a cut piece of wood, no roots, no soil, no water, no light, no source of nourishment of any kind, and yet it produced life. The Aaronic priesthood was not sustained by human capability. It was sustained by the divine presence that gave life to what was structurally lifeless. Aaron's staff was kept as testimony inside the ark, alongside the manna and the tablets of the law, according to Hebrews 9:4. 3 permanent witnesses to the faithfulness of God in a people who rebelled constantly. And the people, at last, spoke the words they should have spoken days earlier. They said to Moses, "Behold, we perish, we are undone. We are all undone. Everyone who comes near to the tabernacle of the Lord, shall die." The consciousness of the holy had finally been planted, late, at great cost, but planted. Then arises a question that burns in the modern reader. Why such an extreme punishment? To answer that, you have to measure what was actually at stake. Numbers 17 and 18 show that God used the episode to permanently reorganize the priestly structure. He established beyond any ambiguity that only the family of Aaron could exercise the priesthood. He established the duties of the Levites. He established the system of offerings and tithes. He established the doctrine of atonement mediated by a priest. All of that would grow from the seed planted in that traumatic event. Had Korah succeeded, or had the rebellion been tolerated, the entire structure that would culminate centuries later in the priestly service of Solomon's temple would have been compromised from its very root. And there is a deeper layer still. The high priest was not merely a religious administrator, he was the only person authorized to enter the Holy of Holies once a year on the Day of Atonement with blood to cover the sins of the people. He was the type, the shadow, the anticipatory figure of the one who would be described centuries later in Hebrews 4:14 as the high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. To attack the uniqueness of the Aaronic priesthood was, without Korah knowing it, to attack the uniqueness of the definitive mediator whom God was preparing for humanity. It was to strike the theological pillar that would sustain the very concept of salvation through a single perfect high priest. Follow the detailed human cost as well. Think about what those families faced in the weeks that followed. Korah's children had lost their father in that way, and yet, according to Numbers 26:11, the sons of Korah did not die. An extraordinary detail. The family was preserved. Generations later, descendants of Korah would be writing Psalms. Psalms 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 84, 85, 87, and 88 are attributed to the sons of Korah. Psalm 46, with its celebrated phrase about God being a refuge and strength, came from the lineage of the very man who had challenged God face to face. Grace worked there on a level Korah could never have imagined. Other families in the camp lost fathers, brothers, cousins among the 250 princes. Each of the 12 tribes lost several influential men on that same day. The trauma spread through every corner of the nation. Funerals were not held. There were no bodies. Those swallowed by the earth had simply vanished. Those burned by fire had become instant ash. The families mourned without bodies, without graves, without goodbyes. In a culture that placed enormous weight on proper burial, that was an additional wound laid upon wounds already deep. On the surface, the political structure of Israel appeared intact. Beneath it, thousands of families were counting permanent absences, 7 days of mourning, 30 days for some, years for others, 40 years wandering together in the desert, carrying that memory in the chest of every survivor. The children of the rebels who survived grew up hearing from others the official account of what had happened to their fathers. And here appears another dimension that many readers miss. The biblical text does not present the punishment as divine satisfaction. It presents it as a mechanism of containment. God sought to destroy the entire camp on both occasions. Moses and Aaron interceded. The rebellion was contained to the people who had led the uprising and to the 14,700 who turned against the brothers the following day. Without the intercession, the death toll would have been hundreds of thousands or more. The story of Numbers 16 through 18 is also, paradoxically, a story of mercy. Mercy through intercession. Mercy that still allows you to see how much worse things could have been. The system held for centuries. The censers hammered into plates and fastened to the altar remained visible for as long as the tabernacle stood. Their symbolism later carried into Solomon's temple in inherited form. Every priest who approached the altar had that bronze before his eyes. Every succeeding generation knew the story. The visual memorial taught without words what reading through numbers would take entire chapters to explain. Do not approach the sacred by your own initiative. Do not confuse zeal with vocation. Do not confuse good intentions with calling. And Aaron's staff inside the ark carried that testimony of supernatural life in dead wood across the centuries. Until the disappearance of the ark, possibly during Nebuchadnezzar's siege of Jerusalem in the year 686 before Christ. According to some reconstructions, it was there, a silent reminder. Where God calls, God sustains. Where God has not called, no human effort produces true fruit. The story of Korah does not end the moment the earth closes. It ends centuries later, when descendants of the man who challenged the holy write some of the most beautiful psalms ever composed about trust, refuge, and worship. It ends when the priesthood he tried to seize reaches its ultimate fulfillment in a unique high priest, according to the order of Melchizedek, who offered not incense but himself. It ends when the Christian Church inherits this narrative as a perpetual example, cited in Jude 11 and in Hebrews, of the necessity of submission to established spiritual authority. What those men did not see, did not hear, and could not have known they were shaping was a theological watershed that reverberates for more than 3,000 years. Every time someone reads about the priesthood of Christ, they are reading about something that only makes sense because the Aaronic priesthood was defended on that day. Every time someone grasps the doctrine of atonement mediated by another, they are standing on ground whose foundations were driven in by the fire over the 250. Every time someone recognizes holiness as a non-negotiable category, they are acknowledging something whose architecture passed through that event. Korah sought to become a priest on one morning. He ended up teaching, with his own life, what true priesthood is for every century that followed. The visible failure of that day became the mechanism of something far more enduring than he could ever have imagined. And perhaps that is the truth this ancient narrative leaves with whoever observes it today. There are moments when the rebellion itself, contained and answered, ends up becoming the cornerstone upon which something far greater than the rebels could ever have built is raised.